Thank you, everyone. So I will be introducing the firewall and security policies. So for any organization to run as it is expected, and any service or any decision that we make, it needs to follow a specific policy so that we are having a standard and we are able to achieve the best outcomes. So in this case of our project, so I will be introducing a total of 6 policies. So the first policy I would like to introduce is the acceptable use policy. So the acceptable use policy is nothing but it tells us exactly what is allowed and what is not allowed for our employees or anyone who consuming our service. So in our case, we need this policy so that we know what we can do when we are actually doing the cloud migration. What are we allowed to do? What are we allowed to touch? So we are like contractors, no? Like when we are coming and working on this project. So it would be in that kind of a scenario. And in disaster recovery policy, this is the second policy. This policy will tell how to create the contingency plans. So in case of any emergency, how do we overcome that emergency? For example, forming a cloud emergency response team. So for this, how do we identify, assess the disaster? How do we find and overcome this disaster? So that is something the disaster recovery policy will do. Now moving on to the next policy, which is the password construction policy. So clearly from the table, you can see what are the characters allowed, not allowed. What is the minimum length and what are the restrictions? Like, for example, we need to have at least 3 of the 4 categories, the lowercase character, uppercase character, a number and a symbol. So like this, we can enforce these type of password policy in the Active Directory. In our case, we have created a domain controller in our implementation. Next, moving on to the server security policy. So here we are talking about the general configuration and monitoring requirements. This could be like logging to hardware configuration for servers. So all of this comes under the server security policy. And also, like finally, I would like to touch on the web application security policy. So here we need to see how we can handle the OWASP top 10 security vulnerabilities using the web application firewall or any other tool. And finally, the firewall policy itself. The firewall policy is about what is allowed and what is not allowed through the firewall. What kind of communication can go through from and through. So for example, we are telling by default block all traffic, but allow a specific IP or specific port. So this is like doing whitelisting or allowing a certain port for RDP connection, etc. Now moving on to the security. Like this is what we have actually recommended and the implementation part has also done it. So from the domain controller perspective, we are making sure that they have to run on a separate VNet and they should not use spot instance. Spot instance is something like to reduce cost. We will be sharing with other people, but due to the security concern of the domain controller, we cannot use it. Okay, from the Windows perspective, because we are using servers with Windows 10 and Windows Server OS, we need to make sure that they follow the password policy and then the firewall is enabled. And the port blocking is also done at a network setting level so that we can restrict the access. It's very important that we do it. And then the next thing is about Azure Virtual Machine. We can use the anti-malware plugin and we need to make sure that we enable backups or we whitelist ports. And also in the web application firewall, we need to enable the OWASP security and then the intruder detection systems, as you can see in the image.